Okay, so right now the US military is, well, it's stretched pretty thin. We're talking high alert across the globe in two completely different and very tense hotspots. It's a huge projection of power, and the stakes are just incredibly high. So that's what we're going to do in this explainer. We're going to break down exactly what's happening on the ground, in the air, and at sea in both of these critical regions. Now, if you listen to the official message coming from the White House, it's all about de-escalation. The president has even said publicly he wants to turn the temperature down with Iran. Sounds like everyone's taking a step back from the brink, right? Well, not so fast. Because while the political talk is all about cooling things down, the military reality on the ground is something else entirely. In the military's own words, the posture remains poised to strike. And that, sends a very different message. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the overall military alert. Then we'll dive into the standoff with Iran, shift over to the action in the Caribbean, talk about what it means to stretch global power this thin, and wrap up with what could happen next. Right, so this isn't a story about just one single crisis. Nope. It's about two major, simultaneous military operations that are unfolding thousands of miles apart. And each one is demanding immense resources and attention. Let's start in the Middle East. Those long simmering tensions with Iran, they've pretty much reached a boiling point, and US forces are on a real knife's edge. The official language they're using here is super important. US Central Command, you'll hear it called CENTCOM, they're describing the situation as status quo ante. Now, that might sound like just business as usual, but trust me, it has a much, much more serious military meaning. So, status quo ante. It sounds kind of tame, right? Like the way things were. But no, that's not it at all. This isn't about things being normal. In military speak, it means going back to a state of high alert. It means you're prepped and ready for immediate conflict. It's not a stand down, not even close. It's basically a standby to fight order. And the people making this call? They're from CENTCOM, US Central Command. This is the division of the military that runs the show in this whole volatile region. So when they use a term like status quo ante, you know it carries enormous weight. And this readiness isn't just some abstract idea. It is backed by some serious hardware. Over at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is the biggest US base in the Middle East, you've got bombers and stealth fighters just sitting there, on standby. The pieces are definitely on the board, ready to make a move. Of course, Iran is sending its own signals. They've issued what's called a NOTAM. That's a notice to airmen, and it's a very clear warning to any and all aircraft to stay the heck away from their airspace. You see, a NOTAM does two things. On the one hand, it's a safety warning for commercial jets. Hey, avoid this potential conflict zone. But it's also a military message, and that message is, anything we see in our skies from now on could be considered hostile. So it's a very big deal. But maybe the biggest move of all is happening out at sea. There is a massive projection of American power steaming towards the region as we speak, though it's going to take a little while to get there. And just get a load of what's involved here. The USS Abraham Lincoln? It's not sailing solo, not by a long shot. It is the absolute heart of a full carrier strike group. So what does that mean? Well, you've got the carrier, obviously, with its whole wing of F-18s. Then you've got an escort of multiple destroyers, and probably a submarine lurking under the surface too. We're talking about a floating fortress, a whole armada, and it's heading for the Middle East at full steam. Okay, let's completely switch gears. While all of that is unfolding with Iran, thousands of miles away in the Caribbean, a whole other major US military operation is going down. The number to remember here is 6. As part of an operation called Southern Spear, the US has now seized its 6th Venezuelan oil tanker. This is a very, very different kind of military action. So how exactly does this work? Well, if we look at the latest seizure of a tanker called the Veronica, it's basically a two-step move. You have these highly trained Coast Guard Special Ops forces who are the ones that actually board the ship. But, and this is a big but, they do it with the full backing of the US Navy and Marines, who are right there providing just overwhelming support. And check out the assets they're using here. You've got another aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford. You've got the USS Iwo Jima, which is an amphibious ship loaded with US Marines, and all of them are there to back up the Coast Guard, who are acting as the spearhead. It's a true multi-branch effort. Now, having an amphibious ship like the Iwo Jima in the mix is really significant. Its whole job is to put boots on the ground, in this case, US Marines. It's a signal that they're ready for operations that could go way beyond just seizing ships out at sea. So, this brings us to the really crucial question. What does it actually mean for the US military to be this heavily engaged in two totally separate parts of the world at the same time? Let's break down the strain that this two-front posture is creating. And these two fronts could not be more different. Over in the Middle East, the mission is all about deterrence and being ready to strike against a state military. But in the Caribbean, it's about enforcement and seizing state-owned assets. I mean, these are two completely different kinds of missions, and they both require huge but different sets of resources. And you know, this high pace is really taking a toll. One source put it pretty bluntly, saying that these ships and their crews have been deployed for so long that they're getting close to their sell-by date. That's a stark way of saying that both the people and the equipment are being pushed right to their limits. And here's a perfect example of that strain in action. The USS Gerald R. Ford, a massive, top-of-the-line aircraft carrier, was actually pulled from its mission in Europe and rerouted all the way to the Southern Command to help out with these Venezuelan operations. That is a major strategic reshuffle, and it just goes to show you how stretched these resources really are. All of this leads us to the final and most critical question: where do we go from here? Because this global posture of power has some really significant implications. And that really leaves us with the big question here, doesn't it? You've got carriers, bombers, special forces, all tied up on two really demanding fronts. So how long can this high-stakes balancing act actually last? And maybe even more importantly, what in the world happens if a third crisis suddenly pops up somewhere else? You know, it really boils down to a massive question of capacity, strategy, and risk on a truly global scale.